and my life is like a lamp to a world that is searching for the path. We have become the example of Christ, and we are now the light of the world. Can the world see the radiance of Christ in you?
Evangelism does not happen by accident. Discipleship does not happen by accident. If we're going to fulfill our God-given mission as a church, we need to be intentional and reach out and share and introduce people to Jesus Christ.
Africa is an amazing continent with 50% of its population under the age of 18. If we impact the children, we would have impacted the future of the church and the future of our world.
Each one of us has something to bring to the table. Are you willing to release your resources, surrendering your material goods or your gifts and talents or your time or your heart? What are you going to do?
If we're going to plant the 300 churches, if we're going to reach out to 1 million people through evangelism, if we're going to disciple 100,000 in this nation, and if we are going to have an impact with the poor, with the needy, with children, with all the others who are part of our communities around us, it's not going to happen unless you have committed yourself to the purposes of God and you have been faithful to live by those purposes.
Express my gratitude for the invitation to share with you on this Christmas Eve service, and very, very impressed with what God is doing here at Nairobi Chapel, and we continue to pray for you and ask that the Lord would continue to bless the work of your hands. The impact that this church is having under our new bishop is known and extends far and wide, and we thank God for that. This week I was listening to a most fascinating story on the BBC. A lady who had put together a cookbook had been invited as a guest to be interviewed on one of the programs about her recipes. What would make somebody be invited on the BBC to talk about a cookbook on the BBC World Service? Because surely there are so many other things and so many more important things that one could address in that airtime that reaches millions and millions of people every day. Well, it turns out that it was more than just a cookbook that she had authored. It was a cookbook with recipes from Syrian refugees, and each recipe had a story to it. And so whenever she went into the refugee camps and she found out about their cooking and picked up their recipes, she tried to investigate behind these recipes. What is the story? Some of the stories were of ancient history. Some of the stories were of their grandparents, but this one story is the one that highlighted the interview of a recipe of chicken and I think falafel or something like that. I can't remember what term it was, but that was the side dish that went with it. And this is how it ended up on the BBC. One of the evenings in Aleppo, a couple went to visit their relatives in a different part of the city, and as you are aware, the Syrian war affected Aleppo, I think, more than any other part of that country. And while they were there, the Syrian army began to bomb their neighborhood, which they had just left a few hours ago to visit their relative on this other part of town. And they were confused about what was going on. They felt, distraught about the whole situation. Yet in the midst of it all, the mother of the home remembered that she had put a chicken in the fridge, ready to cook it for the evening meal. And it disturbed her so much to figure out that their house was going to be bombed with her chicken in the fridge. And this is a true story. Just this week on Thursday, it aired on BBC on Thursday. What happened is that she compelled her husband, poor husband, to drive her all the way back. But they could only get till a certain point because the bombs were raining all over the place. Buildings were being shelled. Whole apartments were coming down. But she said, no, my chicken. And so the husband stopped the car at a particular point, and she began to weave and to duck under the balconies. Whenever there was a little lull in the shelling, she would dart across the street, and she made it through, almost commando style until she got to her home. And she found her home had not been destroyed. And she went in, she opened the fridge. There was no frills about this. This was a rescue operation of the highest magnitude. She grabbed the chicken as it was, and she began her way back, weaving and ducking through the bombs and all the shelling, and made it back to her husband, and he drove her back home. And the story, the author talks about how proud this woman was, because on that day, she cooked for her family a meal, a wonderful chicken dish that fed 14 other people. I don't know where the other people came from, but it was 14 people, and I don't know how this chicken fitted, but it was 14 people nevertheless. And that's how it got to the BBC. If we can get over why she went and why the husband was not the one who went into the house, because I know that's what you women are thinking about here. If we can get over that, we shall finally make it to the moral of the story. So, can we move on, please? And we'll resolve that later on. This is life. That in one place or in one incident, you can find the best and the worst of humanity. The good and the bad in life. The humor as well as the tragedy. All mixed up together, such as it was in Aleppo. For she commented how this woman, during the interview on her recipe, kept thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? If I died right here, do you know that I will be remembered as the woman who died for her chicken? And why am I doing this? But she just kept going on. And it was a difficult situation, but there was also humor in this situation. And it had all the extremes. It all depends on how you see it. The Christmas story, if and when left unsanitized, is no different, and it should be no different because Jesus was born into this world, a real world where we oscillate through the highs and the lows of life, the highs and the lows of life, the difficult times and the good times. You're standing on the mountaintop, but you could also be in the valley itself. The Christmas story should be no different because Jesus is real and wants to meet us in real circumstances. He did not need to manufacture the events around his birth. He didn't sort of try to arrange creation so that he would be born in a particular way and a particular time. Not at all. I am convinced that God allowed Jesus to walk into real life just as it was, with everything, with the manger, with the census, with everything. It was just the way life was at that time. And it is this that qualifies him then to be called Emmanuel, God with us. As I address the unsanitized Christmas story, I will seek to address only one theme in my message today from the version that Matthew gives us in Matthew chapter 2, and that is the theme of power. The theme of power. And I want to give 2 points in this regard and hope to challenge you in how you view power and how you address power and how you deal with power based on the Christmas story. First thing is to say that the Christmas story challenges power. And second, the Christmas story identifies with powerlessness. The Christmas story challenges power, and the scripture goes this way in Matthew chapter 2 from the beginning. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard about this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people and the chief priests and the teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." One thing about Matthew's version of the Christmas story is that it cuts out all the show and all the Santa, all the glitz and all the glamour, all the angels and the shepherds. Matthew is real, wants to give us a real life story about Jesus and his birth. Straight away, he begins to address the issues that come with the arrival of this king. And one of those issues, because he is a king, one of those issues just had to be about power. History and prophecy point to the one who would be born as Messiah to deliver his people, and his birth happened to fall in the times of King Herod, a pretty insecure king who was holding fort on behalf of the Romans. Herod wisely confirmed the facts from the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and when he deduced everything and put it together, it greatly disturbed him, as the scriptures would say. He immediately sensed that his kingdom was at stake if the Messiah had been born in his rule and in his reign. As the scriptures have told us, he was greatly disturbed, but not just him. All of Jerusalem was disturbed. We ask the questions then, why would the chief priest and teachers of the law be disturbed? Were they not looking forward to the Messiah as part of the heritage of Israel? A Messiah who would deliver them? Why should all of Jerusalem, the capital, be disturbed at an event that has taken place in Bethlehem? Why should they feel threatened by the Messiah, Jerusalem, where the Messiah would reign and rule from? I sense it is in the words of verse 6. It is not the mighty Jerusalem, but a humble Bethlehem that would bring forth the Messiah, the King, the deliverer of Israel. Jerusalem was threatened because there was an outsider from the system. And the questions were being asked from within those in power, in the corridors of power. What will he do? He's not one of us. How will he behave? He doesn't have our way of thinking. How do we control this power that we have so well and efficiently used for our means? And it seems that the scriptures have said, he will shepherd God's people Israel, gently lead them and guide them. This gently leading them and guiding them goes against the conventional ways in which power and authority was being handled and had been handled up until that time. Power and authority was carefully controlled and contained amongst the leaders for the benefit of a few. Whether it was King Herod and his court, or whether it was the chief priests and the teachers of the law, who so angered Jesus a few years down the line that he referred to them as whitewashed tools, who was so unhappy with them because they placed burdens on people, that he said to people themselves, "Come unto me, you who labor and are heavily laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon your shoulders, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." This was in light of the things that the chief priests were doing to the people in Israel. Herod, as king, was benefiting from the system. The chief priests and teachers of the law, the religious leaders of the time, were benefiting from the system. Almost everybody else was suffering and was being exploited by the system. And this is how Mary and Joseph found themselves in Bethlehem. But the Christmas story seems to challenge that both in its space and its intention. To shepherd people instead of using them. That's what the Christmas story seems to say, that the ruler will do. A ruler coming in a manger, not in a palace. A ruler coming with songs of joy, not with commands of authority. And as we saw in his life, Jesus, a man willing to lay down his life for others. This kind of leadership, this kind of approach will always threaten the system. People like Nelson Mandela on his return to freedom, and Martin Luther, that crusader for equal rights in the United States, Wangari Maathai, who was more than just one who was concerned for the environment here in Kenya, and Mother Teresa with her kind acts amongst the people in India. Each one of these did not confront the system with violence, but they threatened the system with the power that they held in seeking to serve others, with the power that they diffused in seeking to shepherd others when they were in positions of authority. This last week has been a very interesting one for my wife and I, our family, because we experienced power and authority. Our second-born son is due to head out to university out of the country. And we were busy trying, he's just turned 18, and so we needed his identity card to be able to process his papers, certificate of good conduct, and all these other things that are requirements for his visa and for the final stages of his university acceptance. But then offices were closing on Friday, and things would go downhill, people would go up country, etc., etc. And we had just a small margin in which to do this. And we went down to the DO's office, and we got there, and we asked for help. My wife actually is the one who went in, and she spoke with the people and talked about her situation and asked, can you help us get an ID card in the shortest time possible? They said, technically, you get an ID in 2 weeks. And said, okay, we can manage that, but 2 weeks, we'll be in trouble. Anyway, nevertheless, we went back, we left it at that, and we said, what is the process? This will be signed on this day, and in a certain length of time, it will go to the DC, and then from the officer there, the deputy county officer, it will move to somebody else. And we said, fine, it's a little slow, but let's see. And so my wife went and was able to talk with some other people, when she went to get his security clearance, and they said, no, all we need is his fingerprints in the system. Just go back to them. They told you 2 weeks. 2 weeks is too long for that paper to move. It takes 3 days to move a paper and for his fingerprints to be in the system. This is free information I'm giving you, so you now know. For those of you who are applying for IDs or applying again. And so they told us that, so go back and ask them. So this time we went back, my wife and I went back and asked them, how long will it take? Oh, we were met with such poor treatment. They told us to stop complaining and what. The system moves, and we discovered his bunch with his papers on the day he had applied. Those things had already been moved on. But guess what? Ours had not been taken. They decided to hold on to my son's documents. And we were trying, what do? We are really going to get stuck over here. But my wife was in the bank, and then she remembered there's a lady who asked to keep her space in front. You know how we do it? You've lined up, so you keep switching. Okay, you watch my space. This is my territory. Fine. The lady went and sat down. Then when she came back, my wife said, you look familiar. Weren't you at the county office where they do the ID cards? I saw you walking in. She said, yes, I'm there. And my wife poured out her heart and said, this is the situation. This is where I am. What can you do to help? And the lady said, okay, I will try. We are running out of time, but I will try. And she gave up the rest of her day. This was a lady who was on leave. She gave up the rest of her day, drove with my wife to the county office, and she pursued the paper. She found that it had even now been put under completely. Away. It was nowhere beyond the starting point. It was the same place where she had left it a week later. And she went, she helped retrieve that paper, and she moved it on, ensured that it had been signed by the deputy county commissioner, and on and on and on. And she just was so helpful in the process until at the end of this week, the ID came out. These things are not rocket science. Thank you very much for applauding that lady and people in our system. But it shows that there are two kinds of people. And it's really a matter of choice. And I have been very intentional in choosing this, partly because it's a very fresh experience, but because we think that you have to be in a senior position for you to hold authority and power over people. Actually, you don't. You may be in a very junior position. You just ask the watchman where you work. He can allow people to come in and not allow others. He's in a position of authority, And so it doesn't matter whether you're a watchman, whether you work with KK security at the reception desk. I can't get beyond you if I don't have favor with you, but I can get beyond you if you treat me justly and correctly. It's same thing rising all the way up to the CEO of your organization, to the member of parliament, to the MCA, to those of us who have whatever level of authority. We have a choice. We have a choice when people come to us to put their papers at the bottom of the pile and hold their lives up and say, you will not move, either unless you bribe me or unless something happens, I just will sit on your matters. Or you can say, God has put me in this place and He has given me a sense of authority, and I will use that sense of authority for the good of people. When Jesus came, He came at His birth to be a person who will shepherd His people. But He came and He became a stark contrast to the powers and authorities that existed at that time. And they were threatened by doing good. How I pray that this Christmas season, we can make a choice to be and to have and to respond with the power that Jesus brings into a world where it is used for selves and where it is used to oppress, whether it is used for yourself, towards you, or when toward others to oppress, that we would have a different way of thinking about power and authority. And all of us have a certain level of power and authority. The choice lies with us, but the Christmas story tells us that you can use power for the good of others. Jesus comes and He brings with it the advent of a new way of doing things. But second, the Christmas story identifies with powerlessness. There is no bigger statement that God could have made than that of having the Messiah who would redeem His nation being born in His country, a country that was under foreign domination, and a brutal one for that matter, under the Romans. To add insult to injury, from a human point of view, His mother, because of this domination and oppression and control, had to travel in a very advanced state of pregnancy, a fair distance, in order to be counted in the census. So Jesus was born in the process of statistics and became a statistic as well. And because of this whole logistical nightmare that had been brought about by the Romans, where they required you every so often to report to a center nearest to you to be counted, to be registered, because of this colonial requirement and act of oppression, there was no place for him to be born. There was no decent place for him to come into this world, except in a manger with the animals. The nativity scene does injustice to the kind of place where the Messiah was born. Not just to the smell of chicken droppings. This was the place where the cows were, the sheep and the goats and everything else were. And this was a place where the streets were crowded. There was literally no room for anything. There was no room even for an ambulance to come through. And when the time for Jesus to be born came, that exactly is where he was born. His entrance into this reality was so undignified that he ranked with the animals. Like I said, God didn't manufacture these circumstances. This was real. This was part of the daily existence of the people of Israel under the Romans, harassed and helpless. But like I mentioned, Matthew had no time for the good stuff, like Luke did, with the angels and all the singing. In verse 7 to 12, he glosses over these details and reports in brief about the visit of the Magi to the newborn king, where they offer him their gifts and their worship. But he makes it known to us that beyond this, there is another who seeks this baby. There is somebody else who is looking for this king, not to worship him, but to harm him. And the Magi, being warned about the evil intent of Herod, did not go back to give him the information that he wanted about the baby's whereabouts. It says they took the long route home and did not pass that information to him. And so he was filled with anger, Herod, at being tricked. As I mentioned, I now work with Christian Aid, an international NGO that deals with humanitarian responses, but also advocates for the poor. Our goal and intention is to bring to an end poverty. So our humanitarian efforts are very much at the core of what we do. Development is very much at the core of what we do. But we have found that over and over again, we have been drawn into dealing with the crisis of refugees all around the world. One of our biggest programs is in northern Nigeria with the Boko Haram in Maiduguri, where a lot is happening. But we also have a lot of work going on in Greece and in Serbia, where refugees have been stuck. And so I sent a word out, and I told them, tell me about the condition of refugees. And I was taken aback at the effects of this whole process on mankind. The effects of running and not knowing when the running will end, the effects of not knowing where they will end up. For some of them, they're feeling victorious and triumphant at having got away, but also confused at knowing that they have not quite reached. We often see the physical side of it, the weariness and the hungriness and the sickness, but we don't see the psychosocial effects of all this on refugees. It's a traumatic experience of both relief and fear, triumph and failure, all mixed in one. And Christian Aid right now is doing its best to address the psychosocial issues, putting children in school, being able to address a sense of community for them, and trying to resolve that trauma around that particular side. Verse 13, when they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod, and so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. Whilst the angels sang, while the shepherds rejoiced, while there was peace on earth and goodwill to men, this is life on the other side. There were children who were losing their lives and families in grief and grieving because of someone whose power was threatened, and others who were powerless to stand up against him. And there was weeping and wailing, Rachel refusing to be comforted. Again, this is the unsanitized story of Christmas, that whilst there was joy to the world, there was also pain for others at the same time, because power had been challenged. Why did God choose for Jesus to experience what it is like to be a refugee? There was not much time for him to enjoy the gifts and the worship, and I'm not sure what the distance was from Bethlehem to Egypt, but I'm sure it was a long, arduous, tiring, and threatening journey. The king who had been born had no time to enjoy these creature comforts that we associate with being born, of gifts being brought, of relatives coming to visit, of the soup being made for the mother, and all those things that we know. Rest and comfort and leave and time out and warmth and everything else. No, he had none of those comforts. Instead, he was immediately on a trip, not to a welcoming home village. No, that's not where his first trip was, but to a hostile exile amongst a people who were not his own. He was a victim of power, and he was powerless. I've mentioned the refugees all over the world today, running from civil strife or from persecution, some by their own people, such as the Rohingya Muslims, second-class citizens in their own nation, powerless. Or, like I've mentioned, in northern Nigeria, in Maiduguri, the people in that town being harassed by the Boko Haram. The Syrians, the Congolese, the South Sudanese with civil war, and many others. Spare a thought for them this Christmas. People who, under the vagaries of power, are powerless and are being used by those who are self-seeking. For that was Jesus 2,000 plus years ago. Not only that, when they thought it was safe enough to go home, this is what it says in verse 20. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who are trying to take the child's life are dead." Good. So he got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. And he went and lived in a town called Nazareth, so was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. The unsanitized story of Christmas is actually the story of a refugee, Jesus the refugee. So what did Jesus experience almost right from his birth? He experienced displacement. He experienced harassment. Why did God allow this? I sense that God chose to align himself right from the beginning with those whose life is unsettled, because there is constantly power working against the powerless. And so it is not surprising to see his commissioning in Luke chapter 4, straight after he had come from overcoming the temptation in the desert. And it says this, he went to Nazareth, verse 16, where he had been brought up. Coming from this desert, he has overcome. He's feeling victorious. And on the Sabbath day, he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up and read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. And the eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. He began by saying to them, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." As we come to the end, today this scripture can continue to be part of the Christmas story, where we are representatives of Christ. As his ambassadors, we can confront power by using it in the right way for the benefit of others, as we have read and as we have known that Jesus sought to do. His advent brought with it a new way of using power. Can we be those who would be his hands and his feet to use power in the right way, at whatever level that we find ourselves, at whatever level of authority that we have been given? Can we make the choice either to hold somebody's things down or whether you can help people progress? The choice is yours, but Jesus shows us the way. But there is a second thing. We can identify with the powerless by acting on their behalf, proclaiming to them the year of the Lord's favor in whatever way and whatever season. Nothing is too small to make a difference in someone's life. Nothing is too small to be able to make a difference in someone's life. As someone quoted a while back, to the world, you may be one person, but to one person, you may very well be the world. And this is what Jesus came to do. As we continue to seek to be his ambassadors, he has promised that he will be this: Emmanuel, God with us. I want to pray for us as we come to the end, and I know that already a prayer was offered on behalf of those who are going through challenging circumstances. I want to add my prayer post this message. Peradventure, it has encouraged you to know that Emmanuel, God is with you, even in your state where you feel powerless. But my prayer will be that God, through the agency of a man or a woman somewhere, will come and display his power, and he will act on your behalf to save you. I recognize today that there may be displaced people. I've talked about displaced people, physically displaced, but there may be some displaced people who this Christmas did not know whether to call home home because of the issues that are going on in their homes. Displaced. There may be some who do not know whether they'll have a home tomorrow at the beginning of next year. And they're looking up to the Lord. May the Lord come through for you. Emmanuel, God with you. There are some who may be broken-hearted. A song says, home is where the heart is. And with a broken heart, then you don't have a home for some. I pray that the healer would come and reach out to you. I realize I say this because this is life. At one point we can be celebrating, but life swings back and forth. Christmas does not know seasons of good only. It carries with it the difficult times as well as the good times. And we want to pray that the Lord would come through for you. If you're there, let's all bow down, and I'd just like to recognize that by you raising up your hand and say, Pastor Bob, that's me. I pray for a better Christmas. I've lost someone. I've lost something. I feel displaced. I feel harassed. There's someone who is acting, using their power against me, and I'm powerless. And I want to experience Emmanuel, God with me. All you need to do is put up your hand as a show of faith, and we'll join in praying with you. Yes, thank you. Thank you. All right. All right, thank you. At the very back, I do see that hand. Thank you very much. Please do put down your hands. And Father, as we bring and accompany these ones, we bring them to approach the throne of grace with confidence, knowing that they have a high priest who has been through everything that they have been through. The things that I've talked about, the harassment, the scorn, the shame, the pain, even up to that shameful death on the cross. You've experienced all this, the joys of victory. You've experienced betrayal, Jesus, all these things you have been through, all the emotions that someone could have gone through. And because you're fully conversant, you are qualified to be the high priest on behalf of those whose hands have been raised today. That you would take their needs, you'd take their status, you'd take their heart, you'd take their pain, and bring it before the Father who knows and who understands and who is powerful to act on their behalf and who is benevolent in his approach. Would you gather all this that has been raised up this morning by many who are suffering and are hurting? And oh, Heavenly Father, would you receive it into your hands, embrace it in your heart, and release back to them your plans and your purposes which are good. And between this prayer and the answer, Lord, may your grace be sufficient for them. Because indeed, when we come before that throne of grace, we obtain grace and mercy to help us in our time of need. Lord, I pray that you'd comfort them, you would encourage them, and that you would demonstrate your power towards them, and that this prayer